Hi, my name is Dr. Jason Boxtart. I'm a naturopathic physician. I've been practicing for about 20 years, and my practice focus is men's health. I'm typically talking to men about healthy aging. And usually these are men who have been working a lot, and then they come to a point in their life. Oftentimes they get sort of promoted to a desk job, lift their head up off their desk and look around and think, oh, maybe I should probably start looking after myself. Oftentimes people come to me with their gas tank really empty. Self-care is important because if you look after yourself, then it allows men to look after everyone else in their life. Men take a lot of responsibility for their families. If their health fails them, then they also fail everyone else that they're responsible for. It turns into a really big deal. Some of the, scaredest looking men I have ever met have been looking at me saying, okay, Dr. Boxer, I just had a heart attack. Now what do I do? What we do nowadays is get on it with guys well before we get to that place. I mean, that's really the smart thing. We use evidence-based medicine. So we use lab work to look not only at what's happening today, but then also predict what's going to be happening 5 or 10 years from now. The topic of stress for men, that's really a big topic. This is a broad topic. I like to break it down into different sections of life. There are different stressors for younger men versus middle-aged men versus older men. And there are different circumstances to lead to those stressors. So say, for instance, I was going to be, talking about a middle-aged man, which is a pretty average patient. Oftentimes, there are financial stressors, there's family stressors, and then there's work stressors. You got to remember also there's physiologic stressors, like poor health, right? Or poor diet, or over-exercise or under-exercise. Those are also all physiologic stressors. And then there's emotional stressors, the ones that everyone sort of knows about, right? Somebody cuts you off, driving your car on the way to work. There's the boss that doesn't seem to be very understanding. So there's lots of different stressors. I talk to lots of men that are self-employed. They're responsible for everyone's paycheck, not just theirs. They're responsible for everyone's car payments, everyone's mortgage payments, all of their employees. A lot of these guys carry a lot. How do you build mental and physical resilience to manage that stress? That's really the big deal. I see a lot of guys get buried under all of these kinds of things. They try to take it all on themselves and then just sort of, eat it for breakfast in that sort of mantra way. But eventually that comes around to bite everyone in the backside. I don't care who you are. I've done it myself. I've worked 80 hours a week. I know what that's like. But eventually, you can only do those kinds of things for so long. And then they come to roost. So what do you do about that? Oftentimes, that takes some change. Also, you have to manage the downstream consequences of that period. We're not talking about a couple of difficult weeks. We're usually talking about stressors over years. Building a business, building a career, managing a family, keeping all the finances in place for all of those people. What do you do when you get to the end of your rope? Those are the kinds of things that I talk about with men in my practice a lot. Breaking it down into a simple thing. I talk to guys a lot about the pie. When you look at your life as a pie, and you look at your family life as a slice, and your work life as a slice, and your own personal life as a slice, in certain periods of your life, those slices are going to get bigger and smaller. In the beginning of your career, the family portion of your pie is going to be a little bit bigger because you have young children and you got to, help your wife with looking after the kids and those kinds of things and getting them to baseball and getting them to soccer and all that kind of stuff. It's a real team. And then you get later on in your career and things get more interesting and more serious and more responsible. Then sometimes your work slice of the pie gets a little bit larger. But when that happens, you have to remember that the other slices get smaller. So the trick is to know that, to be keeping an eye on that, making sure that none of the slices gets too small, but also to be looking for opportunities to enlarge those other slices. In my experience, work-life balance, there's no such thing. If you're going to succeed, it is impossible to have a work-life balance. If you want to be at the pinnacle of your career, if you really want to be out there killing it, you have to put everything into it. And so sometimes that means that the other slices of your pie are going to be smaller. But the trick is to know when to lift your head up and say, okay, I think now I have a space and time where I can make those other slices of my pie larger again and make my work slice smaller. And so that's frankly what work-life balance is. And then when you have those opportunities, then what you do is you say, okay, now it's also time to start looking after myself again a bit, to recapture my health, to recapture my time with family, recapture my time with community, delegate more as your career progresses and your work hours can be smaller, not necessarily your responsibility, but just time spent doing it. I see that as an evolution through time with a lot of my patients. But the trick is to be watching for those changes as they go through life, to be cognizant and thoughtful about it, because it's easy to get stuck in that mode and just keep your head down and forget that there are stages in life and stages in your career, and everything needs to be nurtured. The whole garden needs to be watered and looked after. These are the kinds of stressors that I talk about with guys. In middle age, for instance, after putting 20 years aside to go out there and get it, we might be doing nutrition, supplementation, hormone optimization, cardiovascular and glucose metabolism. We look at lab markers. I call them KPIs, key performance indicators. What are the things that are important in your particular case? What are the numbers that we need to be pushing in the right direction? That's really the trick with men's health and stress. I have a lot of first responders in our practice, our CMP members. I also think that military is in that same sort of category, firefighters, ambulance, and all of that kind of thing. Men that choose those jobs have to manage stress in a different way than a guy's just going to the office every day. I mean, listen, everyone has stress, okay? I get that. It doesn't matter if you're going to the office or if you're attending a car crash. For first responders, there's a particular different kind of stress, the kind that can leave you with scratches and dents, that can travel with you through your life. And so first responders, the challenge for them is they need to understand that particular aspect of their job is real. It's going to happen. Part of being high performance at that job is learning to manage those things. You're going to come up against things in your everyday work career that are beyond your ability to manage. This is really difficult for men. We're used to being the guys that are supposed to be able to manage things, whether that's, our emotions, how we react to things, our environment. We're held to that standard. A lot of guys feel like reaching out, dealing with some of the feelings and some of the fears and challenges that they're left with after these really high stress events. Having conversations with colleagues about that, having conversations with other professionals about their experiences can be really challenging. Men are socialized, sort of eat stress for breakfast. We'll tough it out. It's going to be okay. We'll be all right tomorrow. I would say 90% of the time, that's perfectly fine. Men manage stress differently than women. Oftentimes when we come up to a stressful situation, we'll go quiet, we'll sit back, we'll mull things over, internalize our talk. Women, on the other hand, they'll reach out to friends, oftentimes more community oriented in terms of their stress management, whereas men are mostly, taught to be the lone wolf. And I think that that's, in this particular kind of special situation, a mistake. And I frankly just had a conversation with a young first responder who's maybe 2 or 3 years into firefighting. And he's only just started to realize how important this is. Like, you're going to have a 20-year career. You're in year 3. Now is the time to build that muscle so that you are resilient, not only through your career, but also when you go home to your kids and to your wife. You're not bringing all of that stuff home. We've had long conversations about, okay, well, what are the resources that he has available to him? How do we manage that? So first of all, there's professional resources that are available to all those guys. And so everyone knows that. And so there's, people to talk to, decompress, that kind of thing. Also, exercise. There is no better stress reliever than exercise. Look at the medical literature. It's all out there. There are no medications that are better than exercise in terms of managing mood and stress. Staying moving and literally squeezing your muscles releases endorphins and enkephalins, raises serotonin, and helps with managing the neurophysiology of stress better than anything that you can put in your mouth. So staying moving and staying active is a big component of managing stress overall, whether you're a first responder or not, but especially for those guys. And really then the third thing for managing stress is being really clear about sleep. A lot of first responders have shift work. This makes it really challenging for them because once that component starts to go, this is like the last little block you pull out and the rest of the castle falls. If you're not getting that right, then your brain doesn't have the opportunity to reset itself overnight and get ready for the next day. And you get this accumulative physiologic stressor over time that grinds you down slowly. So those are the 3 things you really have to be focused on with first responders and stress, is knowing, first of all, that this is going to be a part of your career, so that you got to get out in front of it right away. Number 2, understanding, knowing full well that you're not being weak by going to talk to people about, critical incidences that may happen. The next thing is self-care. Keep moving Exercise, I don't care how you do it. Pick a sport, do something, okay? But stay moving is a huge deal. There's nothing better. And the third thing is knowing that sleep is critical. You have a shift work, you have stressors that are going to knock you off your game when it comes to sleep. If you can't get sleep right, the rest of it falls apart. So you have to be focused on that. Okay, so on the topic of healthy aging, I have to say that I have conversations with men about this in my practice every single day. It's my practice focus. I live it every day because I'm 57 this year, and I frankly take a lot of this to heart, and I practice this in my own life. The big deal about healthy aging that flows, it's about maintaining lean mass as you age. There is no bigger factor for healthy aging than maintaining lean mass as you age. All of the healthy ideas that you have about living well flow into that. Eating well, getting a little sleep, all of the things. All of those have an impact on maintaining muscle mass as you age. The reason that's a big deal is because it closes the circle on healthy aging. One of the big metabolic downstream consequences of losing lean mass as we age, which is a natural consequence of the anabolic hormones, testosterone and estrogen in women, slowly declining as we age. And so oftentimes, just as a coincidence, we get promoted to a desk job around this time of our life, just consequently have less activity in our lives. Then in men, testosterone starts to fall as we age, which is anabolic, which helps maintain lean mass. And so as a result, we start losing muscle slowly over time. Usually this is a few percentage a year. That's frankly correlated really strongly with testosterone falling as we age. Now, this isn't amongst people who are not necessarily exercising. The consequence to this is that we lose insulin receptors that are primarily on muscle. This is a big problem because this contributes to something we know as insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is really the first domino to fall for all of the metabolic diseases of our time. We're talking about obesity, heart disease, diabetes. These are the preventable diseases of our time that are rocking our society, that are filling our hospitals and overburdening our healthcare system. 80 some odd % of it is preventable, and largely is preventable by eating relatively well. And everyone really knows what that is. I don't have to belabor that subject. And then moving. The reason that works is because if you maintain lean mass, you're maintaining insulin sensitivity. As a result, then you're reducing your risk for heart disease, diabetes, cancer, all of those things all at the same time. And all that takes is a little bit of movement. Just get off your backside and go for a walk, go for a hike, maybe pick up a sport you like. Go join a rec hockey team, go play a little baseball in the summer. I got to tell you, in my life, I did something competitive ever since I was 5. I was doing martial arts for 20 years, and then I got, family and kids and a business and all of this kind of stuff. And everything went to the wayside because I put my head down and did what had to be done during that period of time in my life. And then eventually my health started to fail. I was in my early 40s and things really started to change for me, not in a good way. And so here I am, naturopathic physician, talking about people recapturing their health every day. And this is what's happening to me. Not only did that bother me because it was, it's no fun being unhealthy. I felt like I had lost some integrity. So I really decided to do something about it, but I didn't know what, because, I was used to doing triathlon and marathon and this kind of thing, and outdoor sports. I loved mountain biking, that kind of stuff. Well, I was in my late 30s, early 40s, and had a young family and had a practice, and I didn't have time to go just taking 4 hours. I had to negotiate 45 minutes twice a week to go to the Y because that's what I had time for. I don't like gym exercise. I don't like being on a treadmill. I feel like a gerbil. And so I was resistant to the idea, but I chose it because that's what I had time for. I was taking a pragmatic choice. But eventually, I forced myself to do it 45 minutes twice a week, whether I liked it or not. And then I started to like it. I started to like paying attention to being able to do a little bit more after a while, to paying attention to how much weight was on the bar and how many times I could do it, or how much weight I had on this machine or that machine, and feeling not only better in health, but also watching, I'm a numbers guy. I like to watch the numbers go up, right? It's just sort of like a progression that can happen if you just start with something simple. I went to the Y and forced myself to go. I did that for years on end because that was the right thing to do. I can't say that I liked it all the time, but I did it anyway. Eventually, I really started noticing differences in how I looked and how I felt. And then one of my patients said to me one day, hey, you look like you go to the gym. There's this new gym that opened up in our town at the time, and maybe you'd, like to go there. They did personal training there. And I went to that very special gym that frankly turned out to be a world-class powerlifting gym. And then all of a sudden it was like a whole new world for me. One time, one of the trainers at the gym, I was bench pressing one day, and they said to me, how would you feel like going into a competition? And I said, yep. I love that idea because I just love competing. I love winning, the camaraderie of that whole thing. I became a competitive power lifter. I weighed 155 pounds when I was 37 years old. And eventually, I'm a competitive powerlifter competing at 198. And eventually in 2016, went to Worlds for powerlifting and actually got a medal, but only just because there was only 3 people in my category. But the truth of the matter is that you never know where you're going to land when you start off with something. That's sort of the point. You don't have to get carried away like I did. But the point being is that even if your first choice isn't available to you, try something you don't like. You never know where it's going to land you. Really look for moving. It's really a big deal. Exercise is the way to staying young. The big deal is about compressing disability towards the end of your life. You don't want your life functionality to be slowly fading after 40, fading off into oblivion. And frankly, this is the way most men age. You don't have to. If you pay attention to small details, we're not talking about Olympic exercise programs, but you can make small changes that really make a big difference over the long term. If you think of a vector over time, you can make a small degrees change in that vector. But if you apply time, all of a sudden now that makes a huge difference in 10 years. And that's really the big deal. Paying attention to some relatively small things consistently over a long period of time. Remember, it's the things that you do every day that have an impact on your health, not the things you do once in a while. Go have a fun in Vegas once in a while, but do things consistently when you're at home. And that's the way to stay healthy over the long term. So talking about a healthy diet, when I'm talking to men, sometimes that can be really challenging. I talk to lots of guys who, for instance, are flying off to camp. There might be a week in, week out, or, that kind of thing. Sometimes it's difficult to make choices. Sometimes you're part of a busy family. Sometimes it can be challenging to ask your partner for particular things for dinner. Usually my motto is if someone's cooking for me, I say thank you. And that's about it. But here are some general things to be focusing on when you're talking about a healthy diet. It doesn't need to be complicated. I think that lots of people are selling books. You want to make things sound like a big deal. I got to say, I've been practicing as a naturopathic physician for 20 years. And everything really comes full circle. Early on in my practice, everything seemed complicated. And I wanted to sometimes make the most complicated treatment plans and the most complicated dietary plans. But frankly, in the end of the day, I think that simple is a good idea. So this is what I usually tell my patients. First of all, you should be eating 3 times a day. I think we should have a reasonable breakfast, which is not cereal. Something simple. Yogurt and some granola and some coffee. I'm a big fan of coffee. I think coffee's great in moderation. But I think that eating 3 times a day is a really good idea in most situations. When you look at your plate for a meal, here's the way I would look at it. Usually I tell guys to have some meat of some kind. There are specialized diets for people with low renal function and low protein. Sometimes some people have other dietary restrictions because of other health concerns. I'm talking about a general everyday kind of person. And I would also caveat this with saying there is literature showing that a diet that's lower in meat and higher in vegetables is a reduced risk for cardiovascular disease and for cancer. I get that. But if you're talking to an everyday kind of person, not everyone wants to be vegan. So if you're going to be having a conversation with everyday kind of person, this is what I tell people. Having a little bit of meat on your plate, not a lot, but a serving is about the size of the palm of your hand. You have a vegetable of some kind. Usually I don't mean potatoes, but I usually mean, something with some fiber in it. And then a salad. And that's it. Doesn't need to be complicated. It's just nice and easy like that. And, there are people that don't like their vegetables and all this other kind of thing. And so you might have to have conversations around that. But usually what I tell people is if you want to be a little bit more formal, proteins, carbs, and fats are 40, 30, 30. 40 carbohydrates, 30 protein, and 30 fat in terms of percentage calories, because that's well-rounded. Pay attention to food quality. You want to have carbohydrates that are complex carbohydrates and not simple carbohydrates. What that means is it essentially pre-digested like bread, or is it not, like broccoli? And then healthy fats are usually things like, olive oil. Basically, polyunsaturated fats is the technical term that are the healthy ones. Monounsaturated fats are the ones that are solid at room temperature. You want less of those, butter and that kind of stuff. I think that, just to be really clear, I'm a big fan of butter and not of margarine. Healthy fats, good quality proteins, carbohydrates that are not pre-digested, so not simple carbohydrate. If you keep it simple like that, then most people can do that. The best plan ever is not always the best plan for the patient. The best thing to do oftentimes is to keep it simple. So if there are men out there that are having challenges with stressors, having mental health challenges, whatever it might be, even health challenges, I think that it can be difficult sometimes for men to reach out. My patients tell me that all the time. Sometimes they need a nudge, go do those kinds of things. And so what I would say is, talk to your friends, talk to professionals that you have access to through work. Find peers in your community that may have similar experiences to you, that understand. Those are really good places to start, because self-isolation and believing that you can just sort of eat stress for lunch is not the path. My name is Dr. Jason Boxtart, and my practice is Omnio Medical.